The man who would become Darth Malak started out as a humble village boy in the Outer Rim. Born Alec, roughly 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, on the planet Quelli. Alec would flee his home planet after it came under attack by Mandalorians. Discovered to be Force-sensitive, Alec was accepted into the Jedi Order and would be trained at the Jedi Temple on Dantooine, where he would meet the Jedi known as Revan. Becoming close friends, the two would be knighted just in time for the Mandalorian Wars, starting 3,964 years before the Battle of Yavin. The Jedi Council would refuse to act, sensing an unseen evil that was secretly pulling the strings of the Mandalorians. Refusing to stand by as billions died, Revan and Alec would take command of the Republic's military along with a group of like-minded Jedi and take the fight to the Mandalorians. Revan and Alec would eventually win the war, though at the cost of their own souls. Having to fight against such brutal adversaries caused both to begin to more closely mirror the warlords they fought, rather than the Jedi they once were. Discovering that the Jedi Council had been correct in sensing a third party manipulating the Mandalorians into an invading army, Revan and Alec followed the trail into the unknown regions, finding the surviving Sith Empire under Lord Vitiate. Discovering Vitiate to be the puppet master who was secretly preparing an invasion of the galaxy, the two confronted him in an attempt to prevent the invasion before it could ever begin. Instead of the long battle of lightsabers and the Force that was expected, the pair were instead utterly dominated by the Emperor's psychic powers. Under the Emperor's influence, their turn to the dark side was complete. Sent to be the vanguard of the coming invasion, the two eventually located the Starforge, an ancient Rakatan weapon that could mass-produce entire armies and starfleets. Once they gained control of the Starforge, the two rebelled, forming their own Sith Empire with Darth Revan in charge and Darth Malak as his second-in-command. Launching an invasion of the Republic, the two would not want for allies, as both Jedi and Republic military leaders would flock to their cause, wanting to join forces with the heroes of the Mandalorian Wars. However, Malak was no longer the loyal right-hand man he had been as a Jedi, and when the opportunity arose, he betrayed his master, ordering his ship to open fire on Revan's flagship and claiming the Dark Lord title for himself. Unbeknownst to Malak, Revan survived and had his memory forcibly wiped in order to join the Jedi once more. Revan and Malak would have a final confrontation in the chambers of the Starforge, with Malak being slain in the ensuing battle. The early years of Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order saw the emergence of some of the most powerful Jedi in galactic history, and Battlemaster Kyle Katarn was no exception. A human male born on the colony world of Selenon, Kyle Katarn would begin his career as an Imperial stormtrooper, but would end up defecting upon learning that his father was murdered by Inquisitor Jarek in an effort to safeguard the location of the Valley of the Jedi. Guided by the spirit of Jedi Master Q-Ron, Katarn would carve his way through Jarek's minions before slaying the Inquisitor in a climactic final battle. Though initially uncertain of his place in the galaxy, Katarn would be forced into battle once more against the Dark Jedi Desan and his army. After repeating the victory he achieved against Inquisitor Jarek, Katarn's doubts were erased, and he fully joined up with Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order. Elevated to the rank of Master for his achievements, Katarn would show an unprecedented prowess with the blade, training some of the Order's most esteemed field agents along with surviving the Yuuzhan Vong's invasion of the galaxy. Katarn's achievements would soon earn him the title of Battlemaster, along with a lifetime seat on the Jedi High Council. Following the outbreak of the Second Galactic Civil War, Katarn was handpicked to lead a Jedi strike team to capture or neutralize Darth Caedus. While unsuccessful in killing the young Sith Lord, Katarn was successful in pressuring Caedus enough to allow Katarn's allies to discreetly place a homing beacon on Caedus' cloak. This action would be instrumental in the Jedi's victory at the Battle for Centerpoint Station. 2 years after Kaidos' death, Katarn would be present for the Jedi Order's secret war against the Lost Tribe of the Sith. While largely not a part of the main engagements against the Sith, Katarn would nonetheless rack up several kills over the course of the two factions' engagements. Hello YouTube, this is the Phoenix Exalt bringing you the next installment of my Versus series. For this analysis, I will be using Darth Malak during the time frame of KOTOR 1, and Kyle Katarn from the time frame of Beta the Jedi. I will be pulling from Legends continuity along with any canon materials that do not directly interfere with previously made Legends materials. Due to the fact that the Disney Story Group is going in a direction that is neither original nor creative, I will not be using canon as the main point of Star Wars media for my videos. As always, I own none of the characters, art, music, or other media depicted in this video, and all rights to them go to their respective companies. With that out of the way, I present to you Darth Malak versus Kyle Katarn. If these two legendary masters met on the battlefield, who would be the victor? Darth Malak was a powerfully built human male in his mid to late 30s by the time of his death. A formidable warrior who possessed both extraordinary agility and endurance, Malak nonetheless bore the scars of his experiences. Demagol's experiments left him with an elongated spine and lack of body hair. He was slightly afflicted by dark side degradation, possessing deathly pale skin and cloudy gray eyes. His jaw had been forcibly removed during a lightsaber duel with Darth Revan, and he was forced to wear a cybernetic collar to hide the wound and to speak clearly. As previously mentioned, Darth Malak's endurance was exceptional, his greatest display of which was his survival of Demagol's experiments. Additionally, despite his imposing bulk, Malak was surprisingly graceful. He was often seen being capable of elegant combative maneuvers, along with precise motions and flourishes. All in all, Malak is not a combatant to be messed with. A human male who stood at just under 6 feet tall, Kyle Katarn was 67 years old and was just a few years past his physical prime. Though initially unimpressive in comparison to some of his peers, Kyle Katarn largely transcended the barriers inherent to a combatant of his age due to his lifelong focus on physical combat. Katarn has been shown carving his way through literal armies of enemies of varying degrees of skill, and while shrugging off otherwise lethal wounds is just a video game mechanic, Katarn could take an inhuman amount of punishment. Katarn has survived direct blaster shots, close proximity to grenades, bursts of force lightning, and even powered through being speared through the abdomen by a lightsaber blade while simultaneously having a speeder rammed into his back. Considering that other Jedi of similar age groups such as Ben Zalo and Qui-Gon Jinn were killed by similar injuries, this feat was especially noteworthy. For Kyle Katarn, it is a death blow or nothing. This conclusion is easy to call. While both combatants are exceptional specimens who are as tough as nails and physical powerhouses in their own right, the verdict comes down to one simple factor. Darth Malak is roughly 3 decades younger than Kyle Katarn, and there is nothing that can change that fact. Malak's mask does not come into play, as Malak only requires it for cosmetic purposes and the ability to speak clearly, and so Katarn disabling it would have no effect on the engagement. Both are extremely durable combatants, with Kyle surviving a lightsaber wound being comparable to Malak surviving Demagol's experiments. Therefore, while Katarn may have largely overcome the disadvantage brought about by age, if the two were placed in a box and told to fight hand-to-hand to the death, it is my belief that Katarn would eventually be the one to fall. Darth Malak gets the edge in physical abilities, though I must stress this is a slight edge. As a veteran of the Mandalorian Wars and Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Malak was one of the most skilled and deadly lightsaber duelists of his era. While his chosen form has not been confirmed in any source, fellow YouTuber EvanNova95 has theorized that Darth Malak was a practitioner of both Form 2 Makashi and Form 2 Ataru, using both as a basis for the study of Form 7 Juyo. While I will usually attempt to avoid speculation when and where I can, this is a theory I agree with. The most aggressive form of lightsaber combat, the standard prerequisite to Juyo, is a mastery of two other forms of combat. This results in no two applications of Juyo being the same, as every practitioner is going in with completely different skill sets and backgrounds. Malak's battlefield conduct during the Mandalorian War is being described as an overpowering warrior, charging recklessly into combat is a good description of the typical Juyo practitioner. As for the reasoning behind Makashi and Ataru being the building blocks of Malak's style, this comes down to the technical aspects of how Malak conducts himself in duels, along with his opening stances. Makashi was an ancient form of lightsaber dueling that predated the Sith Order itself, focusing on tight conservative movements that both maximized efficiency and precision. Makashi was designed for blade-to-blade combat first and foremost, and true masters of the form were often some of the most skilled duelists of their era. Ataru was the most acrobatic and physically demanding of all the classical forms of lightsaber combat, categorized by both wild flourishes and acrobatics, along with a fluid integration of physical combat into lightsaber sequences. From the scenes shown in the KOTOR game, it becomes apparent that Malak chose to combine the flourishing swordplay of Ataru with the relaxed posturing of Makashi, resulting in a flourishing style of combat that maximized efficiency along with trading physical combat for purely offensive swordplay. This already astonishingly aggressive style was only amped by Malak's study of Juyo, which gave his style even more ferocity. The result was a trade-off. The benefits of such a combination was a style that was built to last, but was so overwhelmingly powerful that it could overwhelm underprepared opponents of an equal or greater skill in just a few strikes. But the downside was a deficiency in defensive viability, and the lack of development with the integration of physical combat left him exposed to such attacks. Additionally, his conduct when faced with groups of opponents suggests that Malak was at the very least not in his element against a group of assailants of sufficient skill. It should be noted that Malak's lack of defensive viability was not in fact an oversight, but a calculated risk. Assuming that Malak was indeed a specialist in Forms 2, 4, and 7, then Malak would have three incredibly diverse and technically advanced forms of lightsaber combat at his disposal that all focused on lightsaber dueling. Such a combatant would be exceedingly rare to find, and on the off chance that an opposing swordsman actually had the saber skills to defend against Malgus' onslaught, Malak would always have his force abilities to fall back on. Malak was not known for his tactical prowess, and while it might be unfair to compare him to the military genius that was Revan, it should be noted that he was criticized for an over-reliance on brute force. That being said, Malak was able to prove that he was capable of tactical planning as a strategist, his greatest showing being the battle for the Starforge. During the battle, Malak correctly deduced that none of his Sith acolytes would be capable of defeating Revan. Instead, he instructed a portion of them to delay Revan, while the forced the Revan's allies to break off and run damage control. This gave Malak time to prepare his own chosen battlefield, and while he clearly overestimated the dark side amp he would receive from the Starforge, he did show an ability to manage events on a grand scale. Malak's showings on the Leviathan were perhaps more pertinent to this video, as Malak was dropped into an engagement with Revan, Bastila Shan, and Cartho Nasi, cold. Malak had no previous knowledge of Revan's survival, of his betrayal, and was completely caught off guard by his former master's appearance. Malak quickly came up with a plan. He first used Force Stun on Shan and Onasi, and after a brief bout with Revan, retreated into the corridors of the ship. Malak would then isolate Revan's companions, and had Revan's companions managed to locate him, Malak would have prevailed. Even with a failure of his original plan, Malak still managed to turn events to his favor by instead focusing on Bastila Shan and forcing Revan and Onasi to flee. While Revan would live to fight another day, Malak achieved one of his primary objectives in the war, the capture of Bastila Shan, whose battle meditation had the power to single-handedly change the war. In terms of accolades, Darth Malak has defeated the Jedi Master Kavar in combat, though reports of the Jedi's death were grossly exaggerated. Additionally, the writer of KOTOR, Drew Karpyshyn, claims that Malak was Revan's superior in terms of lightsaber combat. However, writers have been known to overhype characters in the past, or simply not give them the feats to back it up. As for more concrete feats, we know that Malak was able to defeat Bastila Shan in the corridors of the Leviathan. However, we also know that Malak has been defeated by Revan on 2 occasions. Once when Revan was a Sith Lord, and another after Revan had his mind erased. Lastly, it should be noted that while he has employed a tactical retreat, Malak will not flee from an engagement, his pride and honor demanding that he stick it out to the bitter end, no matter the cost, which first resulted in the amputation of his lower jaw, and then cost him his life. That being said, Malak was not above using treachery and sneak attacks to give him a slight edge in a fight. In conclusion, Malak was an opponent who could reliably defeat the vast majority of combatants he came across, whose main weakness was an opponent skilled enough to defend against his aggressive style, and strong enough in the Force to resist any other methods of attack. A veteran of many wars who bore the scars to prove it, Kyle Katarn would be regarded as one of the most skilled lightsaber duelists of his day, along with being one of the most skilled lightsaber instructors of his day. Over the course of the main New Jedi Order media, Kyle has always been held in high regard. His martial prowess has been directly compared to the likes of Luke Skywalker and Kip Duran, along with exceeding some of his fellow Council Masters in terms of saber skills. Kyle Katarn's career could best be described as the light side version of a Jedi killer. At the beginning of his time as a Jedi, Katarn killed Inquisitor Jarek along with his 6 Dark Jedi followers. Just a few years later, Katarn would face down scores of lightsaber-wielding Sith cultists, and while none of these cultists could be considered particularly impressive in terms of skill, this feat is impressive because of how early Katarn was in his career, along with how many opponents in such quick succession he would face. Next, Katarn would defeat Tavion Aximus, a powerful Dark Jedi, along with killing a dark side amp Desan. Considering that Desan was capable of going toe-to-toe with Luke Skywalker before getting his boost at the climax of the conflict, this feat was especially impressive. Finally, Kyle Katarn would face down Darth Caedus in combat on Coruscant. Katarn's reputation was such that even Darth Caedus, who at times deluded himself into believing that he was just as skilled in lightsaber combat as Grand Master Luke Skywalker, believed Katarn to be a serious threat. Caedus would even begin panicking when Katarn began coordinating with his Jedi allies that were providing cover for their duel. While it is true that Caedus was still recovering from his thrashing at the hands of a bloodlusted Luke Skywalker, the novel makes it clear that Caedus was close to fully healed, and Katarn was forced to break off his assault on multiple occasions to rescue his allies from harm's way. It should also be noted that Katarn's defeat at the hand of Caedus was not due to superior skill on Caedus' part, but rather a desperation tactic used to make Katarn be taken by surprise and give Caedus the edge. Caedus would end the engagement by force pulling a passing speeder off course and directly into the back of Katarn, launching Katarn forward into Caedus' blade. As for the specifics of Katarn's style, he had a large skill set as a result of training from multiple Jedi Masters. Like all battle masters, Katarn was a master of all 7 forms of classical lightsaber combat, though, unlike any battle masters that came before him, Katarn chose to hybridize all 7 instead of cycling through them one at a time. Like any good hybridization, however, Katarn needed a form to anchor his style around, and for that he chose Form 5, Jem So. A master of Jem So would typically use the opponent's momentum against them, parrying attacks in such a way that left their adversaries open to a strength-based counterattack. The form was often considered as an alternative to the pure defense of Surisu, and despite its strength-based heavy-handed nature, Jem So was a form that was well suited to marathon engagements. In essence, peace through superior firepower. Katarn's saber offense paired off these strength-based attacks with full-body acrobatics and precision-based strikes. One of Katarn's preferred methods of ending a fight was to lock up an opponent's blade before forcing it out of their hand, and following it up with a speed-based attack flurry to execute the adversary. Kyle's personal style contained a strong offensive focus. However, this did not come at the expense of defensive viability. Kyle was easily capable of deflecting blaster fire, and when confronted by a lone adversary, he would use tight conservative blocks to shunt aside attacks, with the aim of getting his opponent to make a mistake and lower their guard. Despite the fact that all of Katarn's military experience came from the perspective of a field agent rather than a general, he was still renowned for his quick wit and situational awareness on the battlefield. To this end, Katarn's battlefield conduct was incredibly flexible, being capable of being dropped cold into less than ideal situations and being able to make a quick and effective decision to best respond. This unique combination resulted in Katarn being an extremely dangerous combatant, especially when you take into account his extensive battlefield experience. Katarn would also use his knowledge of the 7 forms against his opponents, analyzing their style and molding his own to best respond to them. All in all, Kyle Katarn had a style that was as varied as it was deadly, exactly the sort of style expected from one of the greatest battle masters in the Jedi Order's history. This conclusion is difficult to call. On the one hand, Malak's feats seem more impressive, having only been defeated by Revan, who is likely the most skilled lightsaber duelist of his day, despite the words of Duke Carpenshin. On the other hand, Kyle Katarn has yet to be defeated in combat by pure saber skills alone, with his defeat at the hands of Darth Caedus owing more to desperation tactics and trickery on Caedus' part, rather than a lack of skill on Katarn's. The 2 combatants' secondary feats are of little use as well, considering Malak has defeated Jedi Masters, and Katarn has defeated powerful Dark Jedi that were boosted by an external source of Force energy. In terms of technical skill, neither combatant has a skill set that the other will not have seen before. Katarn is a master of all 7 forms, so Malak's Juyo, Makashi, and Ataru will not be a surprise. And I have a hard time believing that Malak will have never seen Jem So before. Both combatant styles are built to last, and so neither will have trouble engaging the other in a marathon lightsaber duel. The next argument to be made is Malak's tactics in battle, and since Kyle Katarn's only defeat has been at the hands of treachery, it is worth looking into. To begin with, sneak attacks would not come into play on an even battlefield, so therefore what's left is the probability of Malak pulling off a stunt similar to Caedus against Katarn. While there is no doubt in my mind that Malak would indeed be capable of performing such an act, I have not seen anything that suggests he would. His tactics on board the Leviathan speak well to his tactical mindset and an ability to think on his feet, but nothing he displayed was similar to the tactics used by Caedus on Coruscant. Additionally, Caedus achieved his surprise victory through the usage of the Force, not through lightsaber dueling. And considering that this verdict is exclusively about lightsaber dueling, even if Malak was shown ending a fight similar to Caedus did, I would likely have to discount it as a Force-related feat does not come into play in this category. Due to the fact that neither combatant has a clear edge over the other, I proclaim Darth Malak and Kyle Katarn equals in martial arts and lightsaber dueling. Trained as a Jedi Guardian, Malak was likely trained in the standard applications of the Force that all Jedi Guardians were trained in, this being physical augmentation, telekinesis, and the Jedi mind trick. Darth Malak would truly come into his own as a Sith Lord, rounding out his skill set and pushing his combative viability to the next level. Malak's powers were such that his movements could be sensed from across the galaxy, and his thoughts would send ripples through the Force. All of his followers readily acknowledged him as the greatest Sith alive. He stood second only to Darth Revan in terms of raw power. As stated previously, Malak was an expert with physical augmentation, using it to improve his strength, speed, reflexes, agility, and pain tolerance to superhuman levels. This was amped by Dark Rage, which amped up his physical output even further, along with Dark Healing that allowed him to slowly repair minor wounds in the midst of combat. Despite all of this power, it paled in comparison to Malak's other abilities. Already a telekinetic savant, Malak was able to unleash force waves powerful enough to send humanoids flying, and once he became a Sith Lord, his control became finely tuned, able to ragdoll humanoids and utilize the Force Whirlwind ability, an ability that would lift the target into the air and spin them rapidly. While not outright lethal, it is easy to see how this ability can be used to one's advantage. Malak has proven his ability to penetrate telekinetic defenses on multiple occasions, and while the strength of his own barriers was never tested, it is safe in assuming that only a being of comparable power could penetrate them. As a telepath, Malak advanced the practice of the Jedi mind trick to insidious levels, actively dominating the mind of his target instead of just influencing them. Malak's character sheet credits him with an immunity to fear effects and mental intrusion, though the immunity to mental intrusion had its limits, as he did have his mind dominated by Emperor Vitiate. Unsurprisingly for a Sith Lord of his power, Darth Malak was a master of Force lightning, using it as both a weapon on the battlefield and an instrument of torture. Next up on his list of powers was Force Stun, an ability that overloaded a target's nervous system with Force energy, rendering them completely immobile. As for how Force Stun is applicable in combat, this is something of a debate when it comes to Malak. On the one hand, he did successfully pull off a Force Stun against Bastila Shan. However, he either chose not to or failed to do the same to Revan. Additionally, if such a power was in fact the ultimate trump card in a fight, then Mara Jade Skywalker should have theoretically been able to freeze both Lumaya and Jacen Solo in their tracks and kill both easily in their respective engagements. This obviously did not occur, and while the out-of-universe explanation is it is simply not a good story if that's how fights occurred, when making a versus video, an in-universe explanation must be found. My explanation is that Force Stun is only effective on an opposing Force wielder when said Force wielder is either taken off guard or outclassed by the caster in terms of power, as those are the scenarios that it is seen working. Malak was also capable of amplifying his screams as a sonic weapon. As for non-combative abilities, Malak had some ability with Sith sorcery, and was known to have experimented with the Force-based technology of the Starforge. Perhaps his best-known showcase of this power was his experiments on Jedi captives. He would place the Jedi into artificially induced comas and hook them up to special chambers within the Starforge. He treated them as artificial repositories of Force energy that he could draw upon at will to amplify his powers. This dual focus on both the arcane and practical sides of the Force resulted in one of the most dangerous and powerful Sith Lords in history. The title of Battle Master can often result in describing a Jedi who is an incredible martial artist but who has middling Force abilities. This was not the case for Kyle Katarn. A common case I've witnessed in my experience when discussing the members of the new Jedi Order is that Kyle Katarn usually gets sidelined in favor of other Jedi when it comes to power level. I believe that this is solely due to the era that Kyle lived in being full of some of the most powerful Jedi in galactic history. To begin with, Luke Skywalker is indisputably the most powerful Jedi to have ever existed, and who ever will exist. Next, we have Kip Duron, who by all accounts comes a close second to Luke in terms of sheer power. Jason Solo will often come to mind when considering diversity of powers, and Corran Horn with his esoteric abilities is always a fan favorite. However, in my opinion, had Kyle Katarn been active in any other era, he would not be as easily overlooked, and while he may not be shown manipulating black holes, turning invisible, or absorbing building-level explosions, he is still one of the most powerful Jedi of his era. To begin with, Kyle Katarn's development as a Force user was heavily influenced by his time as both a Jedi and a Dark Jedi. Unlike most Jedi and Sith who are clear-cut in their alignment, Katarn chose a more pragmatic approach to the Force. Katarn is quoted as believing that terms such as light side and dark side are distinctions of insignificant difference. Katarn viewed the Force as a tool that could help him in ways no other tool could, but a tool nonetheless. Though initially fearful of his potential, Katarn would eventually succeed in straddling the two realms, while retaining his moral compass. Force-based physical augmentation was his bread and butter, with Katarn often displaying the superhuman strength, speed, and agility common to all Jedi. Kyle Katarn was also a capable telekinetic, his force pushes being able to punch through stone walls and sweep groups of stormtroopers in Yuuzhan Vong off their feet and scatter them as if blown by the wind. While on a mission to Vizhun, Katarn conjured up force blast powerful enough to catch and send back shots from a Stakar concussion rifle. This feat is roughly comparable to what Kylo Ren accomplished at the start of Force Awakens, except on steroids, as Stakar concussion rifles are built with sonic and conventional blaster technology integrated as one. One of Katarn's favorite abilities on the battlefield is force-based strangulation, lifting a target off the ground and crushing their windpipe in a manner not at all dissimilar to Darth Vader. He has also shown an ability to utilize saber throw, along with holding back several tons of falling rubber in order to escape an impeding cave-in. Kyle has also shown a reliable ability to penetrate other Force wielders' barriers, ragdolling Sith cultists along with the Dark Jedi Tavion Aximus, and more impressively, overriding the defenses of Desan after he was boosted from the dark side nexus of Yavin 4. Backing up his offense with a strong defense, Katarn has been seen deflecting force pushes and waves from the likes of Tavion Aximus and Yavin-powered Desan. During the duel on Coruscant, Darth Caedus raised a hand as if he was planning on launching a force push at Katarn, and Katarn would hold up a hand in a deflecting gesture. While what happened later was that the gesture had been a ruse on Caedus' part as he threw a passing speeder into Katarn, the mere fact that Katarn had the confidence to raise a hand for deflection despite having the foreknowledge of how powerful Caedus was, is telling of Katarn's defenses, and it is my personal belief that Katarn's active defense was strong enough to parry such a strike from Caedus. Katarn was capable at telepathy, using mind tricks, force concealment, and long-distance communication, instead of battle meditation. Katarn favored the usage of battle metals that allowed him to sync his mind with his allies for near instantaneous communication and complete radio silence. It has also been implied that Katarn is capable of the Mind Shard ability, which would mentally splinter an opponent's mind and rack them with pain. In terms of energy-based powers, Katarn was a master of Force Lightning, using it to attack a single or multiple enemies with the capacity to kill near instantly, and while never shown, it has been heavily implied that Katarn was capable of flash-frying his enemies. Finally, we come to Katarn's most controversial abilities, the Dark Shear and the Sever Force abilities. Also known as the Spear of Midnight Black, the Dark Shear manifested itself in an invisible spear made out of pure dark side energy, It was capable of punching through telekinetic barriers and killing the target instantly. The Sever Force ability was almost the exact opposite, cocooning a target in the light side energy that would cut them off from the Force, and while it was usually employed temporarily, it could become permanent if the caster desired it. As for why they are controversial, this comes down to a debate as to whether or not these abilities can be used quickly without an external power source to draw on. The Dark Shear ability is in my opinion an ability that would clearly require a power source to draw on, as it has not been seen before or since its introduction. Sever Force is more interesting as it is a power that has been used on multiple occasions with apparently little effort by those sufficiently powerful in the Force. However, I do not believe that Katarn was capable of this normally, and as for why, we must once again look to his duel with Darth. Considering that the duel was an ambush, in which Katarn had plenty of time to prepare for Kaidos' appearance, and Kaidos had no foreknowledge of the incoming attack, this would have been a perfect moment to sever the Sith Lord's connection to the Force and capture him with relatively little effort. However, what we saw happen instead was Katarn and his team opting for a more contemporary approach. This implies one of two things. One, that Katarn was indeed incapable of using the power without an external source to draw on, or that Katarn was capable of it but could not use it on a target of comparable or greater power without an external power source. In either case, the result of him not being able to use the power normally is the same. All in all, Kyle Katarn was a dangerous and powerful Force wielder, who in any other era would have had a fair shot at being the most powerful Jedi of his day. Once again, we find a verdict that is difficult to call. Once again, Malak's power is only eclipsed by that of Revan and Emperor Vitiate, who were the two most powerful Force users in their era. As for Katarn, his power is eclipsed by some of the most powerful Jedi in galactic history. As for power scale in relation to one another, I find it likely that the two were of comparable power, as both have been shown achieving similar feats in their respective showings. Neither of the two had lacking telekinetic defenses, and so neither will be ragdolled. Both have the capacity for lethal Force lightning, and neither have access to Tuta Minas, so those powers cancel out. Katarn's ability with the power of Mind Shard will not come into play due to Malak's telepathic defenses. Malak's abilities with Sith sorcery are null and void on an even playing field, as are Katarn's Dark Shear and Sever Force abilities. As for how I place these two combatants on a power tier, I see them both as roughly equivalent to Count Dooku in terms of power. Both were extraordinarily powerful Force users who utilized the full range of abilities available to them, and both were just shy of being counted as the most powerful in their era, as both operated alongside some of the most powerful Jedi and Sith in galactic history. And, had they been active in any other time, both would have been serious contenders for being the most powerful Jedi or Sith of their era, which is proven by Malak taking control of Revan's Sith Empire largely unopposed after his presumed death. Due to these factors, along with neither combatant having an ability that is both applicable in a fair contest and one that the other does not possess, neither combatant will be given the edge in Force abilities. Darth Malak was armed with a standard Sith lightsaber with a blood-red blade, likely powered by a red synthetic crystal. With no other special equipment being present, this setup provided Malak with no benefits other than familiarity with his own handiwork. Kyle Katarn wielded a standard Jedi lightsaber that was likely powered by a blue Adegan crystal. More interestingly is the K-16 Briar pistol that Katarn was seen wearing throughout his career, often in tandem with his lightsaber. The K-16 Briar was a unique weapon, as it was noted to be less powerful than other blaster pistols like the DL-44 worn by Han Solo. but it came with a unique feature of being able to expel its entire heat source in one extraordinarily lethal blast. While the effectiveness of Katarn's blaster against someone as scaled as Malak is questionable at best, the fact that Katarn carries one allows him more options than Malak's standard blade, and therefore gives him the edge in terms of weapons and equipment. And now, the verdict, which for this video will be different from the previous 8 episodes. As I write these Versus series videos, I continually look for ways of improvement to the format, along with my own personal style. Upon reflecting on the previous verdicts, I realized that while my narrated fights are fun to write, they often do not explain why I'm reaching the conclusion for the video, and instead take up space that could be devoted to either better breaking down the characters or fleshing out the conclusions I have reached. Therefore, I will be modifying how my verdicts are explained. I will begin by briefly describing the early, mid, and late fights, along with how often I believe a hypothetical matchup would end in each stage. I will also use a much looser form of narration to describe the fight, focusing in on how the combatants' skill sets would be revealed and how they would affect the fight, along with what their tactics would be in response to one another. Lastly, as per usual, I will declare the victor along with an explanation of how I reached the conclusion. This form of verdict may be subject to change as I further refine and improve this part of the videos. With that out of the way, let us begin. For this fight, let's say it takes place on the battlefields of Mandalore, with multiple loose objects of various sizes for the combatants to use. Additionally, let us assume that for the purpose of this fight, neither combatant recognizes the other because one or both combatants recognizing each other would cause an uneven playing field. Additionally, neither combatant will have time to prepare for the battle, and the fight will start with both combatants in full view of each other. As the final tally for this matchup, I see the victor winning 6 times out of 10. This will be a description of one majority victory. Let us begin. In the early fight, it will be unlikely that either combatant will be able to end the fight so early. Both are incredibly skilled in lightsaber combat and force abilities, and as such there will be no quick victory for either combatant. Malak likely has more of an overpowering offense than Katarn, though Katarn's more well-rounded nature makes up for that. Additionally, considering both are sufficiently powerful in the Force, neither would be able to simply ragdoll the other and score a quick victory. It is also likely that the early fight would see mostly lightsaber combat, with only a few Force abilities here and there, mostly Force pushes or shoves. All in all, the early fight would not be a true battle, but rather two swords masters testing each other to get a read on their opponent before making their move. The mid-fight would see both sides break out the Force lightning, though considering their comparable power in this regard, neither would gain a conclusive edge. If either combatant had 2 to menace, this would likely be a different story, but as it is, both only have the option to either absorb it with their lightsaber, or just tank the hit. In terms of saber combat, this is where we would see both combatants start to tailor their approach to their adversary. Katarn would likely realize that meeting Malak's assault head-on would not be practical, and would fall into a more loose and defense-oriented style, aiming to draw out Malak for a quick counterstrike. I find it unlikely that Malak would be susceptible to such an obvious ploy, but it is possible that Malak would begin to ramp up his saber offense in order to crush Katarn's defenses. And it is also possible that Malak doing so would open himself up to a counter that might not be lethal, but would put him on the back foot, and considering Malak's lacking defenses, this would result in a victory for Katarn. However, I believe that such an occurrence is unlikely, and as such, only one of the 10 possible scenarios will end in the mid-fight, More likely than not, this fight will go on into a slugging match. The late fight would be an all-out brawl consisting of force abilities and lightsaber combat, with both Malak and Katarn pulling out all the stops to kill the other. Malak would likely start letting loose, by either way of his saber output or his force abilities. Katarn would likely respond in kind by deflecting what he could and counterattacking when he could. The latter the fight would go, the more we would see the problems with Malak's skill set appear. Because Malak's offensive onslaught is completely overwhelming to most combatants, Kyle Katarn is not most combatants, and Katarn has every lightsaber form at his disposal, along with an unconventional blaster pistol that could very well take Malak off guard long enough for Katarn to get the edge. After a long debate, the win condition for Malak was not to ever be forced on the defensive, and the win condition for Katarn was to force Malak on the defensive. So, I had to decide which combatant could make the most of the encounter and achieve their win condition before the other. After a debate, I believe that Jedi Battlemaster Kyle Katarn is most likely to do so. And thus, I declare Kyle Katarn the victor. As for my explanation on the verdict, this comes down to less about their powers and more about how they put them together. Darth Malak and Kyle Katarn are very similar in my eyes to Count Dooku in terms of how they functioned in their respective eras. An astounding lightsaber duelist, but not unbeatable. An extraordinarily powerful force user, but not the most powerful of their era. Having a diverse set of skills, but not as diverse as some of their peers. While both Malak and Katarn developed relatively similarly in terms of their force abilities, at least as similarly as a Sith Lord and Jedi Master can develop, the way that they developed their skills with lightsaber combat was entirely different. Malak threw everything he had into a near unstoppable saber offense that was designed to overwhelm anyone he came across. This was by design, as because he had such an overwhelming offensive, he would not need to worry about his defensive skill set. Katarn, however, chose a more well-rounded approach by hybridizing multiple forms to suit the needs of the moment. As for their tactical skills, while Malak has been shown to think on his feet, so has Katarn, and where Malak has years of combat experience, Katarn has decades. Additionally, Malak's slim advantage in physicality will likely not come into play, since both are capable of marathon lightsaber duels, and Malak does not incorporate physical combat techniques into his lightsaber sequences. I will not deny that Malak has a few ways to take down Katarn. A desperation tactic similar to Darth Caedus' actions could very well take down Katarn. Additionally, it could be possible that Katarn would eventually crumble under the pressure of Malak's onslaught. However, at the end of the day, I eventually concluded that Katarn would be the most likely to either take advantage of an opportunity created by Malak, or create his own advantage. Though I will admit that this would in all likelihood be the ultimate test for Kyle Katarn, as I do not believe any other combatant could test Katarn in the way that Malak would. With that out of the way, I would like to thank you all for watching the 9th episode of the Versus series. Please keep in mind that this is all my opinion of a hypothetical matchup, and feel free to leave comments, criticisms, or suggestions for future matchups in the comments down below. As a reminder, I will be taking suggestions for future Season 2 matchups, and these suggestions can be in the form of a specific matchup, or simply a character you would like to see me use. Those of you that suggest a matchup that is featured will receive a shoutout at the beginning of the video that you suggested. This is the Phoenix Exalt, signing out, and may the Force be with you, always.